Some say history was never written by kings or conquerors, but edited quietly by the Vatican itself, through truths buried under marble, behind iron doors that never open. In the cool stillness beneath those sacred halls, forgotten scrolls sleep beside letters that were never meant to be read. Their ink has faded, but their silence endures. These are not myths. They are the hidden pages of our shared past, concealed not because they are false, but because they were never meant to be found. Tonight, we trace the trail of 40 secrets the Vatican hoped would never rise to light. If mysteries calm your mind, close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story unfold. Beneath the golden ceilings of the Vatican, where prayers echo and tourists marvel, a different kind of silence waits. It lives under the stone, beyond the chapels, far below the sunlight. There, in the cold layers where air turns still and heavy, something ancient rests. Not bones, not relics, but secrets. It begins with a corridor, narrow, smooth, almost breathing. The walls feel alive with time. No footsteps echo. Even whispers fade before they can travel. This place was not made to be visited. It was made to be forgotten. But someone once walked there. His name was Father Angelo. Few remember him, and none recall his face. For nearly 30 years, he tended to the deepest levels of St. Peter's Basilica, a silent caretaker of the underground. His robes were always covered in dust, his voice a soft flicker in the dark. He was trusted, but rarely seen. And it was Father Angelo who once said, "The Church does not bury its dead, it buries its questions." He had seen what no one else was meant to see. Behind hidden walls, he found doors that could not be opened. Scrolls sealed with wax so ancient it cracked like bone. And deeper still, chambers older than the Vatican itself, rooms unmarked by maps, carved by hands no one could name. One of these, he said, was perfectly round. The floor was black stone, the walls covered with Latin words no scholar could translate. The room was empty, except for a single column of air, colder than ice, though no wind ever passed through. Priests who entered there once never returned. In time, even their names were forgotten. Father Angelo spoke little of it. He only watched and waited. Then one morning, around the winter of 1990, everything changed. The bells rang above for morning mass, but below, all sound died. A tremor moved through the earth, not an earthquake, but something else. When the silence lifted, the passage to that circular vault was sealed in stone, not by builders, but by order of the church itself. Father Angelo retired quietly soon after. He left behind no memoir, only a single card beneath the altar that read, "They are not hiding relics. They are hiding something older than belief." And with those words, the silence beneath the Vatican turned into something else. Not peace, but warning. I was never meant to speak. For most of my life, I lived behind those same walls, sweeping marble floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, dusting ledges that remembered more prayers than voices. I was what they called a custode, a caretaker. Not a priest, not a scholar, just a watcher of forgotten things. No one noticed me, and that is how I saw what others never could. By the time I grew old, my hands had touched corners that no map recorded. My eyes had traced words written in the margins of forbidden books. Some were hidden behind false walls in the Vatican library. Others lay in chambers darker than confession. In one of those rooms, I found a page, a single torn fragment from an ancient text. The ink was fading, but still legible enough to read 4 Latin words, Veritas non timet tempus. Truth does not fear time. I kept that page for 20 years. On quiet nights, I would walk alone with a lantern through the cold passages beneath the basilica. Down there, the quiet is heavier than stone. It presses on your chest until you feel it breathing with you. That, I learned, is where the real Vatican lives. Not in the art or the gold, but in the silence itself. One evening, as rain rolled over Rome and thunder rattled the glass above, I stayed late. The archivist had gone. I followed a strange feeling through a hallway I had never entered. At the end stood a wooden door I had only seen once. Locked, bound in iron, forbidden. But that night, the lock was open. Inside was a small room. Shelves lined the walls, each holding sealed wooden boxes. No labels, no markings. Only a faint symbol carved into each lid, a cross turned sideways. In the center stood a pedestal draped in velvet. I lifted the cloth expecting a relic. Instead, it was a mirror, old, warped, the silver cloudy like smoke. I looked into it, but did not see myself. I saw another room, a candle, a handwriting words that vanished as the ink touched the page. I closed the cloth and left. I never returned, but the memory never left me. Now, as my breath grows thin and my hands tremble each dawn, I know my time is short. I must tell what I saw, because truth does not fear time. Only those who guard it do. There is a hallway inside the Vatican where even light hesitates. It ends at a heavy wooden door bound in iron, guarded not by men, but by silence. Few have ever passed beyond it. Those who do enter what is known only in whispers, the Vatican Apostolic Archive. On paper, it is not called secret. In Latin, Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum simply means the Pope's private archive. But privacy inside these walls has never been simple. What is hidden for centuries becomes something else. It becomes sacred shadow. Within that archive lies more than 1,000 years of human history. 35,000 documents stretched across 80 kilometers of shelving. But those numbers tell only part of the story. The true records, the ones that could change what we know about the past, are sealed behind layers of permission no one dares request. A scholar from Florence once told me what he saw during his brief access to the archives. His name was Giovanni. He had been allowed to study a few Renaissance letters, but nothing more. One evening, on his way out, he passed a door left slightly open, a door that should never be unlatched. Inside, a single candle burned beside a small wooden box. The air was cold, too cold. Inside the box lay three things: a letter written in blood, a photograph with no face, and a folded parchment tied with black ribbon. The next morning, the door was sealed with stone. Giovanni never returned to the archives. What lies deeper, no one truly knows. Some say the trial records of the Knights Templar rest there, documents thought destroyed, rediscovered in silence centuries later. Others whisper of lost exorcism reports, letters between popes and dictators, even maps of ancient cities erased from every chart. Somewhere in that labyrinth, it is said, lies a drawer marked only with a number. Inside is a parchment, unsigned and undated, describing a chamber beneath the Vatican older than the church itself. At the bottom, in faint ink, a warning reads, "Leave it buried, or the stones will speak." In the Vatican, history is not only written, it is hidden. And the deeper one goes, the more that silence begins to sound like an answer no one dares to speak aloud. 4 centuries ago, a man stood beneath the painted ceilings of the same city, trembling not from fear, but from discovery. His name was Galileo Galilei. Through a telescope he had built with his own hands, he saw moons circling Jupiter and shadows crossing the face of the sun. What he witnessed shattered the belief that Earth was the center of creation. His findings shook not just science, but faith itself. Galileo wrote letters to explain what he saw. One, dated 1613, argued that faith and science were not enemies, that truth, wherever found, only deepened belief. That letter vanished for centuries. Many thought it burned. But in 2019, it resurfaced deep in the Vatican archives. The signature was his, but something was wrong. Words had been changed, passages softened, accusations removed. It was not Galileo who rewrote it. It was someone else. No one has ever said who made those edits. But the implication was clear. Someone within the church had changed the very words used to condemn him. A quiet cover-up, not hidden in shadow, but in ink. Galileo was tried in 1633, found guilty of heresy, and sentenced to live the rest of his life in confinement. They forced him to kneel and recant, to silence his truth for the sake of peace. But as he rose from the floor, he whispered in Italian, "Eppure si muove," and yet it moves. Centuries later, the Vatican would admit that Galileo was right, but by then, the silence had already done its work. Some of the trial records, including the diary of a judge who believed Galileo but voted against him, still remain sealed in those same hidden rooms. In the end, the Vatican's greatest secret may not be what it hides, but how long it can keep the world from hearing the echoes beneath its stone. Down there, past the corridors where no light dares to linger, the air still hums with the weight of everything unsaid. And if you listen closely, the silence itself begins to speak. Faith, they said, was safe. The page began with those words. When truth is buried, it read, it does not die, it sleeps. That fragment, like so many others, has never been seen by the public. It is not protected by guards or locked gates, but by memory, the Church's oldest form of defense. Because even after 4 centuries, the stars have not moved, and the whisper of Galileo still drifts through the stone halls of the Vatican. The year was 1307. The Vatican stood at the center of a gathering storm that would soon engulf all of Europe. Before dawn, soldiers moved through the narrow streets of Paris in silence. Their orders were absolute. Find the knights, take them alive, and let no one escape. The Knights Templar, once the mightiest order in Christendom, were suddenly branded heretics. Accused of blasphemy, idolatry, and forbidden rites, they were dragged from their homes and thrown into dark cells. But behind those accusations hid something more than fear, something far older. Power, gold, secrets the Church never wished to see the light of day. For centuries, the Vatican claimed that the trials were fair, that the evidence spoke for itself. Yet the truth refused to rest. If the knights were truly guilty, why had the records vanished? For 700 years, that question haunted historians. Many believed the parchments destroyed forever. Then, in 2001, in a quiet corner of the Vatican's secret archive, an Italian paleographer named Barbara Frail made a discovery. Hidden within a folder marked by a meaningless code, she found a silk-bound document. The ink was pale, the fibers brittle, but the words remained. It was no ordinary record. It was the Chignon parchment, a forgotten account of a private hearing between the Pope and the last leaders of the Templar Order, and what it revealed changed history. The document showed that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Templars of heresy. He believed they were not enemies of the faith, but victims of political ambition, perhaps guilty of pride or strange oaths, but not of betrayal. And yet, Despite this hidden forgiveness, the Pope allowed the executions to go on. He allowed the knights to burn. Why? No one knows. Some say he was cornered by King Philip IV of France, who owed the Templars vast debts and feared their power. Others believe the Vatican wished to silence them before their knowledge, or their treasures, threatened the delicate balance between throne and altar. But the most chilling clue comes from a margin note in another sealed Vatican file. Their truth would undo us all. The story of the Templars did not end in fire. It dissolved into silence, into coded ledgers, vanished names, and rooms that no one speaks of. For 7 centuries, that truth has remained folded in parchment, hidden behind the same walls that condemned them. Even now, the Vatican rarely acknowledges it. Yet somewhere deep in the archives, under dust and candle soot, the story still waits. Not a tale of heresy, but of betrayal. A history the Church could not erase, only bury. Inside those same vaults, behind 3 locked chambers and a cabinet marked only by a Roman numeral, rests a bundle of yellowed letters tied with white ribbon. They are not listed in any public record. Their ink is faded, their edges frayed, but each one bears the same signature, Pius XIV. He was the Pope who guided the Church through humanity's darkest age. From 1939 to 1958, as the Second World War spread across continents, Pius XIV spoke often, but not always clearly. Some called him the Silent Pope, others the Cautious Shepherd. As millions were rounded up and murdered, he offered only prayers for peace, rarely naming the guilty or the dead. Critics called it cowardice. Defenders called it strategy. They said he worked in secret, protecting lives through quiet diplomacy. But truth, as ever, lay somewhere in the shadows. And then there were the letters. A Vatican custodian, near the end of his life, spoke once of finding them. He had spent years carrying documents from the papal study to the archive. One night, while cleaning a private chamber near the Apostolic Palace, he noticed a drawer left slightly ajar. Inside were folded pages bound by a note marked, "Not to be released." He did not take them, but he remembered. Later, those letters were quietly moved to a restricted section, catalogued, then locked away. Only a handful of men ever saw them again. One historian, granted brief access during an internal review, claimed to have read a single page. Dated 1942, addressed to the bishops of Europe. In it, Pope Pius wrote of unspeakable crimes committed under banners of false order. He urged the Church to speak the truth, even if the world turned away. He called for unity, mercy, and courage. Yet that letter was never delivered. Why? Some say the Nazis were already watching. The Vatican feared retaliation. Others claim politics. Neutrality demanded silence. But another theory lies in a single haunting sentence at the letter's end. The truth may bring light, but also fire. What did he mean? Was it fear of violence, of division, or of exposing what the Church itself had chosen not to see? Whatever his reason, the letters remain sealed. Words written in sorrow, never spoken aloud. And in that silence lingers a question that has no rest. If the Church had shouted instead of whispered, how many lives might have been saved? The Vatican has never confirmed their existence, but archivists know where they lie, tied with ribbon, silent in the dark, a voice almost erased from history, still waiting to be heard. The Vatican's silence is famous, but within that silence, there is sound, the sound of paper, turning softly beneath old hands. Tens of thousands of pages rest in the Apostolic Archive, some filled with prayers, others with power. And among them, in a drawer marked only by a single symbol, lies one of the strangest collections ever found. The mark does not match any known language. It is not Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. Some say it is Phoenician. Others, something older still. Inside that drawer are maps, hand-drawn on animal skin and parchment. Most depict familiar worlds: ancient Jerusalem, the Roman Empire, Constantinople. But hidden among them are maps of cities that do not exist, names that appear nowhere in recorded geography, streets that spiral like constellations, towers shaped as stars. One map stands apart. It shows a walled city beside a river long gone. Its name, written in deep brown ink, is Civitas Solis, the city of the sun. Its roads form perfect circles. Its temples align with the solstice. And at its heart is a single square, marked with the words Altar Ignis, the altar of fire. No Roman or Greek record mentions this place, yet its architecture mirrors early Christian basilicas. Some whisper it was a lost sanctuary, founded by exiles fleeing Jerusalem after the 1st century. If true, why has it vanished? A retired Vatican architect once claimed he had seen blueprints that resembled the same designs. In the 1960s, while restoring St. Peter's Basilica, he was shown old sketches. Among them were pages drawn in a language he could not read, buildings shaped like inverted crosses, stairways leading underground, annotations written in Latin that wasn't quite Latin. When he asked about them, the priest beside him only said, "They are not to be built. They are to be remembered." The drawings were taken away and never returned. Some believe they were Jesuit designs from early missionary studies. Others think they were copies of ancient maps smuggled into Rome during the Crusades. But the darkest theory claims these cities once existed and were erased. There are ruins near the edge of modern-day Turkey that match the strange geometry of those Vatican drawings. The site was sealed to the public in the early 2000s, no explanation given. Were these the same cities? And if so, why were their names removed from history? Inside the Vatican, history is not simply preserved, it is chosen. What is erased from the earth often lives on in shadow, waiting to be redrawn by another hand. Beneath the splendor of the Sistine Chapel, where tourists stare upward into painted heaven, another world lies waiting. Not made of color or marble, but of paper. Old, fragile paper that sighs when touched. Here, in quiet drawers, rest some of Michelangelo's forgotten works. The master sculptor left behind more than frescoes and stone. He left sketches, letters, and studies of forms that no one was meant to see. In 2012, a Vatican conservator named Lucia made an unexpected discovery. Inside a portfolio marked Structural Planning, she found a page that did not belong. It was no architectural plan, but a drawing, a human figure, bent in sorrow, arms stretched wide, head tilted upward, but with no eyes. Beneath it, 3 words written in small script: Non sono solo. I am not alone. It was unsigned, yet unmistakably his. When Lucia brought it to her superior, she was told to return it and speak no more. She obeyed, but she never forgot. Over the next 2 years, she returned to that drawer in secret. Inside were more pages. Some showed staircases with no end. Others depicted faces without names. One, a sketch of St. Peter's Basilica, but the cross atop the dome was gone. In its place, a circle. Lucia left her post soon after, but before she did, she wrote a letter to a friend. In it, she said, Michelangelo was trying to say something the church could not face. Not about beauty, but about fear. Perhaps about what waits within us when we look too high or dig too deep. Why would the Vatican hide those drawings? Maybe because they showed a man wrestling not with faith, but with doubt. Maybe because the images did not fit the perfection they were meant to inspire. Or perhaps because they feared what people might see in the eyes he chose not to draw. The church holds his ceiling up as a vision of divine creation, but beneath it, in drawers of dust and silence, lies another story, one of struggle, of secrecy, and of a genius who may have seen too much. And still, in the long marble halls, where crimson robes sweep and stained glass scatters sunlight like fire, another shadow walks. He wears no white cassock, holds no throne, yet whispers follow him everywhere. They call him Il Papa Nero, the Black Pope. The title is unofficial, but it has lingered for nearly 5 centuries. It belongs to the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. His power is not ceremonial, it is command. From hidden offices behind Vatican walls, he directs one of the most disciplined and secretive orders in existence. Founded in the 16th century by Ignatius of Loyola, the Jesuits were unlike any other brotherhood. Their vow was not only poverty and chastity, but absolute obedience to the Pope, perinde et cadavere, to obey like a corpse in the hands of authority. Yet over time, their loyalty grew into something else. In 1913, a letter circulated quietly among church officials. It warned that the Jesuits had become a church within the church, possessing influence and intelligence that even the papacy could not rival. The author was never identified, but the fear it described was real. One superior general in particular, Włodzimierz Ledóchowski, held immense authority through the early 20th century. His voice was rarely heard in public, yet his decisions shaped diplomacy, education, even wartime alliances. Inside Vatican meetings, his presence was a shadow that lingered behind every choice, every signature, every whispered negotiation. In a sealed archive uncovered long after his death, a Vatican diplomat's note referred to Włodzimierz Ledóchowski by another name, Il Papa Oscuro, the Dark Pope. Over time, that name evolved into what the world would come to know as the Black Pope. No charges were ever filed, no investigation ever opened. There was no scandal, only a lingering unease, the kind that comes not from guilt, but from the awareness of hidden power. In the Vatican, influence doesn't require titles. It only needs access. The Jesuits have always had both. Even now, the Superior General, the man at the head of the order, lives only steps away from the Apostolic Palace. His home is simple, but his reach stretches across continents. He is not chosen by cardinals or kings, but by his own brothers, elected for life, known to few beyond the gates of the Holy See. The Church speaks of one Pope, the man in white, but the corridors whisper of another, a man in black, unseen, uncrowned, yet whose quiet hand may steer more than anyone dares to say aloud. They called themselves the Company of Jesus. Yet outside the Vatican's walls, they became something much larger, a network of minds trained in silence, obedience, and influence. The Society of Jesus was founded in 1540 by Ignatius of Loyola. It did not begin in cathedrals, but in small rooms filled with scholars. Men of thought and faith, linguists, mathematicians, missionaries, believing that knowledge itself was the sharpest weapon in defense of the Church. But with time, their vision expanded. What began as a spiritual brotherhood grew into a network that wove itself into the fabric of global power. Within decades, Jesuit schools appeared in nearly every major European city. Yet these were no ordinary schools. Their students were the heirs of empires, future kings, diplomats, explorers, and scientists. Jesuit classrooms taught not only Latin and Greek, but Arabic, Mandarin, and indigenous dialects from the New World. Each lesson was a bridge, each student a potential ally. By the 1700s, the Jesuit order stretched across 5 continents. They baptized emperors in China, advised Maharajas in India, and mapped rivers across South America long before colonial ships arrived. They built churches, yes, but also libraries, trade routes, and fortresses of learning. To the faithful, it was missionary work. To the watchful, it looked like quiet control. A French ambassador once wrote in a letter still hidden in the Vatican archives, "The Jesuits go where even armies cannot." He was right. They carried no swords, yet wherever they walked, influence followed. And that influence began to worry both kings or popes alike. In 1773, Pope Clement IV issued a stunning decree, Dominus ac Redemptor, dissolving the Society of Jesus. Their schools were shuttered, their properties seized. Officially, it was to preserve peace within the church. But in the margins of his private journal, the Pope wrote a single confession. "Their reach extends beyond my sight." History often forgets what happened next. Many Jesuits simply disappeared from public view. They continued their work under new names, new orders, their centuries of connections, too deeply rooted to erase. 41 years later, in 1814, the order was quietly restored. No apology, no explanation. And today, their presence within the Vatican is stronger than ever. One of their own now sits upon the throne of St. Peter, Pope Francis, the first Jesuit to lead the Church. Yet even now, the full extent of the Jesuit network remains hidden behind layers of secrecy and time. The Vatican calls them servants of Christ. Historians call them the Church's most disciplined soldiers. But those who study the shadows say something else. The Jesuits are not part of the Vatican story. They are the story the Vatican never meant to tell. Beyond the Vatican gardens, tucked within a quiet stone chapel few have ever entered, lies a small, unadorned room. Its walls are bare. The air smells of wax and dust. And under the trembling light of an oil lamp, a vow is spoken, not before the world, but in secret. It is known as the oath of absolute obedience. Among the Jesuits, it is the final step, a promise reserved for those who have endured years of silence, service, and unseen trials. And when the vow is spoken, it is not to God alone, but to the order's leader, the Superior General, the Black Pope. The man kneeling swears not merely to obey, but to surrender, in thought, word, and deed. He vows to go wherever commanded, serve whoever is chosen, and do so without hesitation, even if the command leads to exile, disgrace, or death. For centuries, parts of this oath have circulated through rumor, carried in smuggled journals and forgotten manuscripts. One line, repeated often in hushed tones, chills those who read it. "I will be as a corpse in the hands of my superior, lifeless, without will, moved only by his touch." Some say this line came from Ignatius himself, written in the earliest days of the order. Others believe it was added later, when the Jesuits' power grew too large to hide. Wherever it came from, its meaning is unmistakable: total surrender. A former novice who abandoned the order before his final vows once described his experience. During his last retreat, he was led into a circular chamber lit by a single candle. The air was cold, the walls covered in Latin prayers. He was questioned in a language he barely understood, then told to imagine his own death, and to accept it as obedience. He never returned. The Vatican insists the Jesuit vows are purely spiritual, symbols of devotion, not control. Yet in the restricted archives lies a letter written in the 17th century by a Portuguese cardinal. In it, he warns the Pope, they obey in ways no man should. It is not faith, it is possession. What gives this oath its power is not its words, but its silence. Those who speak it rarely discuss it again. They move quietly through embassies, universities, and missions, unseen but always present, loyal to the unseen hand that guides them. To obey without question is not the same as to believe without doubt. And in the hidden corridors of the Vatican, that difference has defined centuries of quiet control. The Jesuits inspired fear across the world, not because they shouted, but because they listened. Not because they commanded armies, but because they moved among kings and cardinals with the patience of time itself. Over the centuries, more than 80 nations and territories expelled them. Some claimed it was for peace, others out of fear. But no one ever forgot them. It began in whispers. By the late 1600s, monarchs in Europe noticed something unusual. Jesuit priests had begun advising not just bishops, but bankers. They were confessors to queens, tutors to royal heirs, and private counselors to the most powerful dynasties in France, Spain, and Portugal. By the mid-1700s, suspicion turned to panic. Portugal expelled them in 1759. France followed in 1764. Then Spain, Naples, Parma, and the colonies of Latin America. The reasons varied: political intrigue, economic manipulation, spiritual disobedience, but the pattern was clear. One letter, hidden for years in the Vatican archives and later leaked by a disillusioned bishop, revealed the truth many had feared. They listened to all, but answer to none. Not even the Pope holds their full allegiance. They are a kingdom draped in robes. The fear was justified. Jesuit scholars ran the greatest schools in the world. They mastered dozens of languages, learned to disappear into any culture. In China, they dressed as scholars. In India, as Brahmins. In the Americas, they lived among the tribes. Missionaries in name, observers in truth. And they documented everything. One surviving account still puzzles historians. A Jesuit stationed in Paraguay in the early 18th century kept a diary describing an indigenous city where gold was used not for wealth, but for worship. The city vanished. The journal vanished. Decades later, a single page surfaced in a private collection. It showed an altar shaped like an eye. Were the Jesuits simply too curious, or did they uncover something forbidden? Even the Vatican began to grow uneasy. In 1773, under pressure from European monarchs, Pope Clement XIV suppressed the order entirely. Libraries were burned, letters confiscated, hundreds of priests exiled. But the Society of Jesus did not die. In 1814, it was restored, quietly, without explanation. No apology, no reason, just a return to power. The greater mystery is not why they were destroyed, but how they came back stronger. Today, their reach spans every continent, in schools, missions, diplomatic posts, and universities. Their silence remains their shield, and the nations that once cast them out now welcome them again. Because some stories cannot be erased. They only wait for the right time to be retold. Behind the apostolic palace, beyond the marble and the gold, sits a plain room few ever mention. It has no throne, no stained glass, no ornament. The desks are modest, the lamps dim. Yet for more than a century, decisions made within its walls have shaped the world. It is known publicly as the Secretariat of State, but within the Vatican, it is called something else: Il Cervello, the brain. Officially, the Secretariat handles diplomacy and communication, but its true strength lies not in what it says, but in what it chooses to keep silent. From this small chamber, sealed letters are sent across oceans, private calls arranged, instructions whispered through ambassadors. The man who leads it wears no crown, yet many believe he holds more daily power than the Pope himself. A Monsignor who worked there in the 1960s kept a secret notebook. It was never part of his duties and was not meant to survive. Inside, he described late-night meetings, unsigned memoranda, and orders sent without papal consent. He called the Secretariat a web without a spider, always moving, never still. The notebook vanished after his death. Only one copied page survived, a message from the Vatican to a foreign general on the eve of a coup. The letter was disguised as a theological report. Days later, the government changed hands. Coincidence, perhaps, but the original note now rests in a private vault in Geneva, far beyond Vatican reach. Over time, the office has only grown in scope. Its files include reports from bishops, diplomats, and even scientists. A former ambassador once said, "There is no room on earth so small with eyes that see so far." Officially, the Vatican denies this, but quietly, nearly every major world event, from the fall of the Berlin Wall to unnamed treaties signed in shadow, has passed through this office in some form. And when a new pope is elected, he does not replace its staff. The office remains. The machine continues. Perhaps true power is not about control, but knowledge. Knowing before others do, and deciding who deserves to know next. In the heart of the Vatican stands one door that almost never opens. No one prays before it. But behind it, history moves in silence. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than any prayer. Some say the bones were returned to the hollow behind the red wall. Others insist they were carried to a deeper chamber, locked away to keep them safe from hands that might disturb them. Yet, among Vatican archivists, a rumor persists of a second box found nearby, containing another set of remains, this time with a skull fractured at the jaw. The box was taken swiftly, and no one has spoken of it since. Even the wall itself holds its own secret. In the 1990s, a small fracture appeared along its base. A worker inspecting the damage claimed he glimpsed a void, a small hidden chamber just beneath the stone. But before he could confirm it, the site was sealed, the file quietly archived, and repairs completed. Above it all, the altar stood unchanged. To this day, pilgrims kneel there, whispering prayers over the marble floor, never realizing that beneath their feet, the real mystery still breathes. The summer sun hung heavy over Rome the day she disappeared. June 1983. 15-year-old Emanuela Orlandi left her family's apartment inside Vatican City to attend her evening flute lesson. She never returned. She was no visitor. She was one of the few true citizens of the Vatican. Her father, a trusted lay servant in the papal household. Her home stood only steps away from St. Peter's Basilica, under the shadow of the world's holiest ground. And yet, she vanished. Quietly. Completely. At first, the story was simple. A missing girl, perhaps lost, perhaps taken. But almost immediately, it became something else. There were no ransom notes, no fingerprints, no witnesses, only a strange phone call days later. A trembling voice told her family she had joined a religious group and would not return. The voice was unfamiliar, almost mechanical. Then more calls came. Some demanded the release of a prisoner. Others hinted at something far darker, something the church itself could not face. Soon letters began to arrive. One, unsigned, contained a photograph of a girl seated on a bed, her face empty, her eyes hollow. Was it Emanuela? The Vatican offered no comment. Her family searched tirelessly. The Roman police followed dead ends until the trail turned cold. But within the Vatican, the silence grew louder. Years passed. Theories multiplied. Some whispered that Emanuela had overheard something she was never meant to hear. Others suggested she had become entangled in a secret exchange between church officials and organized crime. A name surfaced, Banda della Magliana, a powerful Roman mafia with rumored ties to the Vatican Bank. It sounded impossible, yet documents hinted that large sums of money had moved in those same weeks, through the same channels. Then came the most haunting clue. In 2019, decades after she disappeared, her family received an anonymous message. A grave inside the Vatican, long sealed, might hold the truth. It was marked by an angel whose finger pointed to the earth in the Teutonic Cemetery, just behind the basilica. The tomb was open before cameras and clergy, but instead of answers, there was only emptiness. The bodies meant to rest there, two noble women, were gone. No bones, no coffins, nothing. Forensic experts were called, records reviewed. The Vatican claimed surprise, confusion. But the archives told another story. Both tombs had indeed once been occupied, until the early 1980s. The very year Emanuela vanished. A second search began in the ossuary below, a chamber where bones from older graves were kept. Hundreds of remains were found, scattered, nameless. Some ancient, some recent. DNA tests were performed. The results came back inconclusive. The investigation was closed. Yet one file slipped through the cracks, an old inventory list. It noted that the bones from those same tombs had been relocated quietly, with no authorization, during the summer of 1983. No one signed it. No reason was given. Her family still waits. The Vatican maintains there is no connection. But the dates, the movements, the silence, they all hum with something unspoken. Why move royal remains that year? Why reseal empty graves? In the crypts beneath the city, silence is never absolute. Sometimes it echoes with what's missing. The last confirmed sighting of Emanuela came from a witness near Piazza Navona. He remembered her standing beside a dark green BMW. Its windows tinted, its license plate untraceable. She wore a white blouse and dark skirt. Her hair was tied back neatly. She looked anxious, but not afraid. Then she got into the car. The witness, a newsstand vendor, later realized her face matched the missing posters blanketing the city. He was certain it was her. He filed a report. It was quietly buried. Weeks later, two of her friends said a man in a dark suit approached them. He offered money for information, wanted to know Emanuela's habits, her roots, her family's routines. He drove a green car. They thought he was police. He never showed identification. The rumor of the green BMW became part of the case's folklore, a thread connecting every unanswered question. In the early 2000s, a retired officer came forward. He remembered that on the night she vanished, a dark green BMW had been waved through a Vatican gate, uninspected, unauthorized. The car wasn't listed among any diplomatic vehicles. No report was filed. The guards on duty were never questioned. That image haunted him for years. He testified quietly. His record was sealed. Decades later, a journalist combing through old police notes uncovered a forgotten parking citation issued to a green BMW in a restricted zone, near the same Teutonic Cemetery where the empty tombs would one day be opened. The fine was signed, then mysteriously voided. The date, June 23rd, 1983. One day after Emanuela disappeared. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in a city built on ritual, guarded by tradition, where every stone is watched, A single car passed through the Vatican's gates and vanished into the silence. And perhaps that is the true mystery. Not the car, not even the girl, but the silence that swallowed them both. In the Vatican's archives, amid the dust and legends, one story stands apart. A tale so strange, it sounds like myth. It begins not with faith, but with machinery. A device said to pierce the veil of time itself. It was called the chronovisor. The year was 1972 when Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk and scientist, stepped forward with an impossible claim. He said that deep within the Vatican, hidden from the world, was a machine that could see the past. Not through visions or dreams, but through light and sound, like a window into history. Ernetti was no ordinary priest. He was a physicist, a scholar of ancient music, fluent in multiple languages. He claimed he had worked with a team of scientists, one of them a Nobel laureate, under the Church's secret blessing. Together, they built a machine that could tune into the lingering energy of time itself. And what did they see? The crucifixion of Christ. Ernetti described the moment in detail. The darkened sky, the crowd's murmur, the agony carved across Christ's face. He said he had watched it unfold, not as a believer, but as an observer. Through that same machine, he claimed to have reconstructed a lost Roman play by Quintus Ennius, a performance from 2,000 years ago. The scientific world dismissed him as delusional, but inside the Vatican, there was no laughter, only silence. Then suddenly, Ernetti recanted. He claimed misunderstanding. He said it never happened, but those who knew him best said something had changed. Before his death, on his hospital bed, he whispered to a friend, they were not ready, and they were afraid. Not long after, a photograph surfaced, a black and white image of a man nailed to a cross, face twisted in anguish. Ernetti claimed it was taken directly from the chronovisor. Critics said it was a fake, a photo of a wooden statue, but no one could identify the original source. And curiously, the Church did not denounce it. Instead, a quiet decree appeared in the archives, written in Latin, forbidding the creation or use of any device resembling the chronovisor. Why forbid something that never existed? Perhaps because it did. Years later, another piece surfaced. A photograph slipped into a scholar's book. It showed the same crucifixion scene, hazy and grainy, like an image taken through smoke. The envelope carried no name, only a note. That which was seen cannot be unseen. When the historian tried to trace its source, he received an anonymous reply. A single line typed on white paper. Destroy the image. Forget what you saw. You risk more than your reputation. He didn't destroy it. He shared it with colleagues. One said it matched the descriptions of a 12th century mystic's vision of the crucifixion, every detail identical. Then the image vanished. Some say the Vatican took it. Others say it never existed at all. Yet those who held it insist it was real, not painting, not relic, but a moment ripped from time itself. If the chronovisor truly worked, it would be more than a machine. Kinaedit would be a mirror, one that shows the truth unfiltered, unedited. And truth, unfiltered, is dangerous. Imagine a world where faith could be replaced with proof, where the stories that built civilizations could be rewound and replayed. A world where miracles could be examined and myths unmade. Records suggest that in the early 1960s, a closed meeting of cardinals debated the fate of the device. One document warned of the destruction of faith through the invasion of certainty. For belief survives on mystery, but the chronovisor offered none. It showed events as they were, not as they were told. And that, perhaps, was the greatest threat? What if the crucifixion looked different? What if the councils that formed the Bible revealed arguments and edits long forgotten? What if the church itself could be seen shaping the truth rather than guarding it? To some, the machine was salvation, a divine revelation. To others, it was heresy in metal form. The decision came quietly. The device would be dismantled, its components separated, hidden across monasteries and vaults, its blueprints destroyed, its existence denied. Father Anetti remained silent to the end, but in his final hours, he left one confession. We buried it because it worked. The church endures not by what it knows, but by what it forgets. And perhaps that is the real secret. Not that the chronovisor failed, but that it succeeded. In the end, the Vatican feared not lies, but truth. Truth too bright to be contained. Because sometimes the weight of truth is heavier than stone. And beneath the golden ceilings and echoing chants, where the faithful pray for revelation, perhaps the church still guards one, a machine that saw too much. It is not simply emotion, it is gravity. The moment a man becomes pope, he ceases to belong to himself. He becomes part of history, a vessel for 1 billion souls, bound to a city built on secrets. His name, his past, even his convictions are left behind. What remains is the burden of eternity. A Swiss guard once spoke of that burden. He was stationed outside the Room of Tears in 1978, the day the cardinals elected Albino Luciani, who would become John Paul V. Minutes passed, then more. From beyond the heavy wooden door came the sound of sobbing, not quiet, but deep, the kind that seems to shake the soul itself. When the door finally opened, the new pope emerged pale and trembling. He said only 3 words to the guard: "Pray for me." 33 days later, he was dead. The official cause, a heart attack. No autopsy was performed. But whispers told another story, that in his short papacy, he had discovered truths too dangerous to live with. Irregularities in the Vatican bank. Names that appeared where they should not. Promises made and broken. The Room of Tears was the last place he was seen alive in peace. Decades later, Pope Benedict XVI sat in that same room for nearly 40 minutes, alone. When he emerged, his face had changed. One aide said he looked older, as though time itself had touched him. Years later, when he became the first pope in 6 centuries to resign, some wondered if that decision had been born in the quiet of that room, where the walls watch and mirrors do not lie. It is not cursed, nor is it sacred. It is simply honest. Inside that narrow chamber, where reflection reveals more than face or faith, something unspoken happens, a moment that cannot be undone. The Vatican calls it tradition. Others call it transformation. But perhaps it is both. Because in a city of golden grandeur, the most human moment takes place in a room no larger than a cell, where tears are not hidden, but expected, and where silence speaks the loudest of all. Beneath those same marble floors, where echoes outlive footsteps, another secret sleeps. A book said to be bound not by faith, but by fear. It is not on display. It is not studied by seminarians. Yet it is guarded more carefully than relics of saints. They call it the Grand Grimoire, the forbidden book of black magic. It is said to have been written in the early 1600s, though some believe the pages are far older, inked in a strange blend of Latin, Hebrew, and symbols belonging to no known alphabet. Within its brittle leaves lie rituals that claim to summon forces not of this world, the dead, the demonic, the divine in shadow. The Church condemns such things as heresy, superstition, or lies. And yet, book exists. It is rumored to rest deep within the Vatican's secret archive, chained shut, sealed in a lead box, guarded by a special order of priests. Why would the heart of Christendom preserve a text of such darkness? One theory begins with a French priest, Antoine Joseph, in 1871. While rebuilding a fire-damaged chapel in the mountains near Toulouse, he found a bundle of parchment hidden behind a stone wall. Among them, a partial copy of the Grand Grimoire. Disturbed, he took the pages to Rome himself. He was never seen again. The copy, however, was quietly catalogued under another name, Theological Research. Only a few scholars were ever allowed to view it. One Jesuit linguist who studied the text in the 1970s said the instructions were too precise, too structured to be fiction. He believed it was not a book of spells, but a chronicle, a record of rituals that had already been performed. History, not imagination. He tried to publish his findings. Days later, he was silenced. The church denied the book's existence entirely, but the whispers never stopped. Some say it is studied, not to practice its contents, but to understand the enemy, to prepare for what the church most fears. Others believe the book is proof that the line between faith and fear has always been thinner than anyone dares admit. They say that somewhere beneath the apostolic palace lies a hidden chamber, candlelit, air thick with incense, where the book has been read aloud by trembling voices. The Vatican calls it superstition. Historians call it a myth, yet the book remains locked away, too dangerous to destroy, because some things are not written in ink. They are written in fear. And in the heart of the Vatican, fear is rarely burned, only buried. Behind another heavy door, in a quiet wing of the Vatican complex, there is a drawer that almost never opens. Inside lie plain folders, edges worn, labels missing. They are not sermons. They are not legends. They are records. The exorcist files. Each file begins with a name, a date, a parish. But what follows is unlike any other report in the church. Testimonies of voices that did not belong to the bodies that spoke them, of eyes that changed color mid-prayer, of frail men and women who threw priests across rooms, of words uttered in ancient languages never studied or heard before. Some files are thin, a few notes, a few photos. Others are thick, heavy with recordings, witness statements, and handwritten warnings in the margins. Before an exorcism is ever approved, the church demands proof, medical, psychological, emotional. Only when every natural explanation is exhausted does the case reach Rome. Only then is the drawer unlocked. One of the most disturbing cases dates to 1975. A young woman in Germany, quiet, devout, began to scream during Mass. Doctors called it psychosis, yet no treatment worked. Her voice shifted, her strength grew unnatural. She spoke Latin fluently, though she had never studied it. Her face changed subtly, her eyes unfamiliar. A priest later said, "It was like watching a reflection that belonged to someone else." Recordings were made, real ones, still locked away today. Over 10 months, 67 exorcism sessions were performed. She died before the last could be finished. The church called it a tragedy. Others called it proof. Her file is still studied quietly in Rome, not for spectacle, but as warning. Another record, decades later, tells of a diplomat's son in South America. Mysterious markings appeared on his skin, symbols matching extinct languages. At night, he would wake screaming in words no one could translate. When the Vatican sent a team, the boy stopped speaking entirely. He began to write instead, in Aramaic, the tongue of the earliest scriptures. The file ends with a single line: recovered, no further manifestations. The Vatican never comments, it never denies. It simply files away what cannot be explained. Because in the Church's deepest vaults, the most unsettling truths are not lost. They are preserved. Not far from those drawers, another kind of preparation takes place. Quiet, constant, and very real. Each spring, behind the walls of a nondescript Roman university, a door opens for a select group of men. They come not as tourists or pilgrims, but as soldiers. It is known publicly as the Course on Exorcism and the Prayer of Liberation. But among those who attend, it has another name: the Vatican School for Exorcists. The training began in the late 1990s, after priests across the world warned of a rise in unexplained cases. Many dioceses no longer appointed exorcists. The Church was, in their words, unprepared for the invisible war. Rome listened. The course lasts 1 week, but the hours are dense and relentless. Lectures, testimonies, recordings, rituals. Professors teach discernment, how to separate the psychological from the supernatural, fear from faith, illusion from infestation. There is no mockery, no showmanship. One instructor told his students, "The devil doesn't need belief to exist, but he thrives when you laugh." In one session, a visiting priest from Africa described a child who had drawn unknown symbols in ash, characters from a language dead for centuries. The classroom fell silent. A young priest who attended that year returned home changed. He began documenting strange phenomena in his parish: objects moving without cause, voices in empty rooms. He now leads a quiet ministry under Vatican direction. There are no certificates, no graduation ceremonies. But those who complete the training are entered into a hidden network, one that stretches across continents, binding priests who have seen too much, believe too deeply, and still continue. And while the Church rarely acknowledges their existence, the classrooms remain full. Because even in an age of disbelief, the Vatican prepares for what might return. Not every battle is fought in daylight, and beyond those silent walls, the Church still trains its sentinels for the darkness. In the hills of southern France, nearly a century ago, a girl named Léonie claimed the Virgin Mary appeared to her beneath a winter tree. She was 15, poor, devout, and untraveled. She said the woman was barefoot, clothed in white, her eyes filled not with comfort, but with grief. It was 1922. Her vision was never approved by Rome. Léonie said the apparition did not promise peace or blessings. Instead, the voice spoke of a coming darkness, a time when the Church would forget the poor, when the halls of power would echo louder than the prayers of the humble. "My son will walk with those who sleep on stone," the woman said. Léonie wrote the words and brought them to her parish priest. Within a week, a man from Rome arrived. She was taken to a convent near Lyon for observation. Her family never heard from her again. No record of her death exists. Only her prophecy remains. And perhaps, beneath the gold of the Vatican and the marble of its floors, her warning still lingers, waiting to be remembered when silence grows too heavy and faith forgets where it began. They said she had chosen silence, a life withdrawn from the world. But silence rarely chooses the living. The village priest later confessed to a friend that when they took Léonie away, he heard her scream. Hers was not the first vision the Vatican refused to see. For centuries, the Church has documented hundreds of reported apparitions of the Virgin Mary. Some were embraced: Lourdes, Fatima, sanctified and framed in marble. They drew pilgrims and prayers, banners and candles. They became symbols of hope. But others, the ones that warned, questioned, or criticized, were quietly erased. In the Philippines, in the 1950s, a nun claimed Mary appeared to her during evening adoration. The message was not soft. They wear gold, but forget the hungry. Tell them the robes are not their salvation. Within weeks, she was reassigned to a remote island. She was forbidden to speak to anyone outside her convent. A year later, the convent burned to the ground. A Jesuit professor once gathered the records of 22 suppressed apparitions. He found a pattern. Every vision silenced carried a message not for the world, but for the church itself. The Virgin's words spoke of pride, greed, and power. The very sins she was meant to warn against. None of those visions were approved. Most were never even investigated. He tried to publish his study. His manuscript was confiscated. His tenure revoked. He left Rome and never returned. The church claims it silences false visions to protect the faithful from deception. But others whisper a darker truth, that when heaven speaks through those without rank, its voice cannot be controlled. If the Virgin's message comes to a child, a farmer, a stranger, who holds the authority? The church says Mary is mother to all, but history shows that when the mother scolds the shepherds, her voice is hushed and her light folded behind locked doors. In the Vatican's private collection, among jeweled chalices and sacred manuscripts, lies an object said to be kept apart from all others. It is not shown. It is not named. Few even know it exists. The few who have spoken of it call it the relic that radiates. The story begins during the Second World War. A Vatican envoy was sent to Eastern Europe under cover of night. His mission was not political, but sacred. In a remote monastery in the Carpathian Mountains, an abbot had died murmuring of something buried in the crypt. A black stone, smooth and carved, with symbols older than scripture itself. The monks believed it was cursed. The Vatican ordered it recovered. The envoy returned, changed, pale, shaken. His hands trembled during Mass. He asked to confess every night. 6 months later, he was found dead in his bed, eyes open in terror. No record names the artifact he brought. But decades later, a guard assigned to the archives described a sealed box, lid inside marble, always cold to the touch. Those who lingered near it complained of dizziness, nausea, or disturbing dreams. It was moved to a chamber below the Vatican Library, sealed by iron doors. In 1982, a Swiss scientist was granted brief access. He carried a Geiger counter. The readings spiked the moment the marble chest was touched. When asked if it was radioactive, he hesitated. Possibly, he said, but the pattern is alive. The pulses rise and fall like a heartbeat. He was never invited back. A Jesuit scholar who once prayed near the chamber described the air as spiritually heavy. That night, he dreamed of a voice chanting in a language he did not know. When he woke, his bedsheets were covered in a symbol drawn in ink, a spiral with 4 arms, matching the mark once seen on the monastery stone. The Vatican has never confirmed such a relic exists, but those who have studied fragments of old correspondence say that if it does, it challenges every notion of what a relic should be. For what kind of relic glows in the dark? And why was it ever buried? Spring, 1939. White smoke rose above Rome. A new pope was chosen, Eugenio Pacelli, now Pope Pius XIII. 6 months later, Hitler invaded Poland, and the world fell into war. What followed remains one of the most debated chapters in Vatican history, the Church's silence as Europe burned. At first glance, the Vatican stood apart. It had no army, no allegiance, but behind its walls, quiet negotiations were taking place. Pope Pius XIII had been a diplomat in Germany. He knew its language, its politics, its leaders. Some say that helped him work for peace. Others say it bound him in caution. Hidden deep in the archives lies an unsigned letter from 1942. It records a meeting between a German bishop and a Vatican official. The bishop pleaded for a public condemnation. The trains were already running, the people already gone. The official's reply was chilling. "We must preserve the church. The time to speak will come, but not now." When survivors later asked why the Pope never named the camps or the killers, the Vatican's answer was measured. Silence was protection. Speaking openly, they said, would have led to greater deaths. And indeed, there were quiet acts of mercy. Nuns hiding children in convents, priests forging baptism papers, diplomats arranging safe houses in Switzerland. Lives were saved, but others too were betrayed by the same silence. As the war ended, those who studied Vatican roots uncovered something darker. Ratlines that smuggled high-ranking Nazis out of Europe under false names. The Red Cross helped, so did some church officials. When it was over, Pope Pius XII neither apologized nor explained. He was praised by some, condemned by others. His wartime archives, partially opened in 2020, revealed letters that deepened the divide. Evidence of compassion, fear, and complicity tangled together. In those years, morality and power did not clash, they intertwined. And in the smoke of that war, the holiest voice on earth chose a whisper over a cry. By 1943, a Jesuit priest in northern Italy began to notice the pattern himself. Families vanishing, names erased. He wrote to Rome asking what to do. The answer came not as words, but as a messenger. A man in plain clothes, with tired eyes, handed him a sealed letter. Take the children. Hide them. Speak to no one. This was how the Vatican acted, not through sermons, but through silence. Through orders no one signed, and kindness no one would ever claim. Priests turned their churches into shelters. Nuns turned their cloisters into hiding places. Records were rewritten, names changed. But the Pope remained silent. He condemned hatred and war, but never said the word Jew. By 1944, the reports from Poland were undeniable. Mass graves, gas chambers. Still, the Vatican did not speak. One cardinal begged, if not now, when? The answer never came. Perhaps the silence was fear. Perhaps it was strategy. But either way, it became history. And in the great fire of the 20th century, the Church, a voice for billions, chose to whisper. Before that war, before the world burned, another pact had already bound the Vatican's fate. It was in 1929. In the Lateran Palace, Pope Pius XIII and Benito Mussolini signed the Lateran Treaty, a compact that made the Vatican its own state, a sovereign city within Rome. On the surface, it was triumph. The Church regained independence. The Pope had his land, his throne, his flag. But in exchange, the Vatican promised neutrality and silence. Mussolini gained what he craved most, legitimacy, the blessing of heaven for his rule on earth. Over the next decade, the Vatican watched as Italy sank into fascism. Mussolini banned opposition, burned books, and filled prisons. The Church, bound by treaty, spoke carefully, cautiously. When anti-Jewish laws spread through Italy, the Pope issued statements of sorrow, but not defiance. Some historians call it diplomacy. Others call it fear. Pope Pius V planned to denounce fascism in a public address. He never did. He died the day before. His successor, Pius XIV, the same man who had helped sign the Concordat with Hitler, continued the silence. Mussolini fell. The treaty remained. It still stands today, ink intact, words unbroken. And within that paper, the same question endures. In seeking to preserve its soul, did the Church trade a part of it away? 4 years later, another pact was signed, darker still. Summer 1933. Inside the Vatican, two men faced each other. One represented the Catholic Church, Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli. The other, Adolf Hitler's envoy, Franz von Papen. Together, they signed the Reichskonkordat, a treaty binding the Vatican to the Third Reich. The document promised protection for the Church in Germany, freedom to teach, to preach, to exist. But the moment the ink dried, Hitler had what he wanted: recognition from the oldest moral power on earth. Within weeks, priests were arrested, Catholic newspapers closed, monasteries raided. The Vatican protested, but the treaty was never revoked. Why? Because silence, once chosen, is hard to unlearn. Pius XI regretted the agreement, and before his death ordered an encyclical condemning fascism. It was never released. Some say he died naturally. Others believe his message died with him. His successor, Pius XI, the same diplomat who had signed the Concordat, ruled through the war. He never broke it. He never condemned Hitler by name. He chose diplomacy over defiance, survival over sacrifice. Today, the Concordat still exists, quietly honored by the German state, a relic of fear disguised as faith. The original signed copy rests in the Vatican archives, untouched, unspoken, and perhaps unforgiven. And even older ghosts haunt those vaults. In 1802, under grey Paris skies, guarded wagons rolled toward Rome. Inside were not treasures of gold, but the Vatican's stolen heart, manuscripts, relics, archives taken during the French Revolution. Napoleon had seized it all. He believed that whoever owned history controlled truth. He called it conquest by knowledge. When his empire fell, the Vatican demanded its memory back. The crates returned, thousands of them. But when the Jesuits unpacked the shipments, they found more than dust and parchment. Some manuscripts were altered, margins rewritten, pages missing, symbols added in strange geometric patterns. One scholar described circles intertwined like eyes, marks from no known language. Another crate remained sealed for years. When it was finally opened, it held a small black box, sealed with wax. The cardinal who inspected it fell ill within days. His last words, recorded by his aide, were barely a whisper. Some words should never return home. His unpublished notes hinted at something that should never have returned. A relic from an older world, one not meant to see the light again. But his writings raised a deeper question of what else had come back that should have stayed lost. When Napoleon's armies plundered the Vatican 2 centuries earlier, they had carried away its very memory. Manuscripts, relics, sacred books, all sent to Paris under the banner of revolution. And when the crates finally returned years later, not everything inside was what it had been. Historians estimate that more than 2,000 manuscripts were never recovered. Some were said to have burned, others stolen, and many quietly absorbed into private collections scattered across Europe. Yet no one truly knows. The Church never released a full inventory. And in that silence, the Vatican's greatest mystery deepened. That when the secrets of the Holy See were taken to France, something else came back with them. Not just pages and parchment, but questions, fear, warnings that were never written in words. Scholars who worked in the archives spoke of strange anomalies, books that seemed older than their ink, pages that resisted decay, and annotations written in a hand that no one could identify. A Jesuit historian once said that some of the recovered manuscripts carried an odor, like burnt metal. Ink that smells of fire, he called it. Others claimed that under candlelight, faint symbols appeared along the margins, spirals, eyes, and marks that didn't belong to any known alphabet. In the Vatican's deep silence, some believe there are volumes that do not belong to this world at all, because not everything that returns is what it once was. By the early 1980s, another kind of darkness had crept into the Vatican, not of faith, but of finance. The Vatican Bank, once a modest institution devoted to charity and administration, had become something far greater and far more dangerous. Behind its marble walls lay an empire of hidden accounts, offshore transfers, and coded ledgers. The name had changed, the Institute for the Works of Religion, but its purpose had blurred. At the center stood Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, an American priest with the confidence of a businessman and the reach of a statesman. He was charming, composed, and untouchable. He forged an alliance with a man who would soon become infamous, Roberto Calvi, the chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, one of Italy's largest private banks. Calvi was called God's banker, a title he carried with pride and fear. His connections reached everywhere: politicians, intelligence agencies, the mafia, and the Vatican itself. In 1982, Banco Ambrosiano collapsed. Over $1 billion vanished into the air. Trails of money led through shell companies, coded accounts, and secret channels tied to the Vatican's name. Journalists demanded answers. The Vatican offered none. Days later, Roberto Calvi was found hanging from Blackfriars Bridge in London. His pockets were stuffed with bricks. The police called it suicide, but the details told another story. The name of the bridge, Blackfriars, echoed a symbol tied to an ancient Masonic order. The knot used in the hanging was one known to secret lodges. His shoes, dry and unscuffed, suggested he hadn't climbed there himself. Back in Rome, Archbishop Marcinkus was shielded by Vatican sovereignty. He was never charged. When asked about the scandal, he replied coldly, "You cannot run the church on Hail Marys alone." It was an answer and an admission, a confession disguised as humor. The Vatican promised reforms, but full transparency never came. Documents were sealed, whistleblowers silenced, and deeper within the archives, investigators whispered of connections between the church, political power, intelligence networks, and organized crime. Because money, unlike faith, leaves a trace. For years, the story of Banco Ambrosiano haunted the Vatican's reputation. It was not just a financial failure, it was a revelation that even sacred institutions could become entangled in the machinery of power. The deeper investigators dug, the darker the ties became. One name began to appear everywhere: Propaganda Due, or simply P2, a Masonic lodge that operated like a shadow government across Italy. On paper, it was a fraternity. In truth, it was a web of influence stretching through politics, media, military, and the church. Its leader, Licio Gelli, was a former fascist and master manipulator. In 1981, Italian police raided Gelli's villa and discovered a list of over 900 members. Judges, generals, bankers, journalists, even clergy. Hidden among the names were figures connected to Banco Ambrosiano and, indirectly, to the Vatican. The revelation was explosive. The church denied involvement, but as more connections emerged, denial grew thin. The collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, the death of Calvi, the shield around Marcinkus, all pointed to something larger, something orchestrated behind the scenes. Some said the Vatican had become a pawn in a game it thought it was controlling. Others believed it was part of the game itself. Then came the whispers of the Black Ledger. It was said to be a single book, handwritten, bound in black leather with no title. It was not kept in the Vatican library, nor catalogued in any known archive. It was hidden, deep beneath the Secretariat offices, inside a private vault. Those who claimed to have seen it described it as a ledger of names, politicians, businessmen, bishops, even journalists, all tied to secret payments from Vatican accounts. The earliest entries dated back to the early 1900s. The most recent, they said, stretched into the 1980s. No one ever produced the ledger publicly, but fragments were rumored to exist. A photocopy of a single page surfaced in Rome in the 1990s. It showed 5 names and a sum written in faded ink. Millions of dollars transferred through religious charities that didn't exist. One of the names matched a bishop who had suddenly resigned and disappeared from public life. Journalists who pursued the story found doors closing fast. Some reported being warned, not by officials, but by priests who begged them to stop for their own good. The Vatican made no comment. The ledger was never seen again. But the idea of it, that silent list of names, connecting faith to corruption, heaven to money, was enough to terrify even those who didn't believe it was real. Because sometimes the most dangerous truths don't have to exist. They only have to be possible. And so, the legend of the Black Ledger endured, a phantom record of power and silence, whispered about in corridors where faith and fear walk hand in hand. Some say it still lies there, in a locked chest beneath the Vatican floors, waiting, unchanged, patient. Because in the Holy City, not all relics are sacred, and not all secrets are meant to be forgiven. They stand at the gates like statues of living color, halberds gleaming, faces set in devotion, still as carved stone beneath the Roman sun. Tourists admire their presence in St. Peter's Square, taking pictures of their uniforms, blue, gold, and crimson, never realizing the weight of the silence behind those painted guards. The pontifical Swiss Guard, guardians of the Pope, are seen as symbols of loyalty, but behind the ceremony lies an unspoken question older than their order itself. Who guards the guardians? Formed in 1506, the Swiss Guard was created not for spectacle, but for survival. They swore allegiance not to kings or nations, but to the Pope alone. Each man was chosen carefully, trained in combat, and bound by oaths of secrecy. But even loyalty, when locked too tightly, begins to strain. Over the centuries, whispers have drifted through the Vatican walls, stories of tensions inside the barracks, of power struggles hidden beneath the surface, and of quiet acts done to preserve appearances. In 1998, that silence cracked. Commander Alois Estermann, head of the Swiss Guard, was found dead in his Vatican apartment alongside his wife. Minutes later, the body of young Corporal Cedric Tournay was discovered nearby. The Vatican's explanation came quickly. Tournay had killed the couple and then himself, supposedly over a denied promotion. But the details refused to settle. Tournay's mother spoke of her son's growing fear, of unseen pressures within the guard. The autopsy revealed a brain cyst said to affect behavior, yet no one could explain the calm, almost clinical precision of the murders. Some claimed a second weapon existed, one that vanished. The Vatican closed the case without trial. Files were sealed. Yet in the shadows of the Apostolic Palace, the rumors never stopped. Anonymous letters circulated in later years, alleging secret rituals, harsh punishments, even hidden surveillance within the Guard itself. None were proven, but in the Vatican, truth and rumor often share the same face. The Swiss Guard still stands at their post today, their halberd steady, their expressions unreadable. But for those who look long enough, the question lingers. What do the Guardians guard? And what do they know that they will never speak? Far from Rome, another kind of silence once unfolded. In 1585, a letter sealed in red wax left the marble corridors of the Vatican and traveled eastward across deserts, seas, and unknown lands, destined for a man known only by title, the Shogun of Japan. Europe knew little of Japan then, only whispers, a land of warriors and silence. Jesuit missionaries believed they were bringing light to a nation of shadows, but faith met discipline, and curiosity met caution. The letters that followed were not just prayers, they were diplomacy dressed as devotion, written carefully under candlelight by papal advisors who understood that words could conquer where swords could not. The first was from Pope Gregory the XIII, extending friendship, blessing, and the hand of Rome. But no reply ever came. More letters followed, some carried by Jesuit priests who vanished along the journey, others burned or intercepted. One letter, set to rest in the Vatican's restricted archive, offered not only spiritual guidance but subtle promises of protection. The suggestion that alliance with Rome meant not just salvation, but power. By the 1600s, the Tokugawa shogunate rose and sealed Japan from the world. Christianity became forbidden. Priests were hunted. Converts were crucified. One Jesuit, Giuseppe Chiara, sent by the Vatican to plead for peace, was captured and forced to renounce his faith. His story would one day inspire novels and films, but Rome's own letters about him remain unseen. Some say 6 of those letters still lie hidden, never shown to scholars. Perhaps they offered political leverage. Perhaps they hinted at relics the Church claimed to hold. Relics said to carry divine force. Why hide them? Because maybe they reveal the one thing the Vatican has always guarded most, its own misjudgment. Letters written in faith that became echoes of failure, stored away to be forgotten. Centuries later, another letter arrived. One that did not come from a king or emperor, but from a voice the Church was not prepared to hear. It was the late 1800s. A missionary from the New World returned to Rome with a parcel wrapped in deer hide. Inside was a letter written in berry ink by a man who called himself Chief Top Leaf, a baptized leader of a native people from deep in the northern forests of America. His letter carried sorrow, not anger. He asked why the same church that blessed peaceful priests also blessed soldiers who burned villages. Why the same cross that healed was worn by men who destroyed. He wrote in broken Latin and his own tongue, begging the Pope to see not just the chapel, but the forest, to see his people as more than souls to be claimed. Your God wears white robes, he wrote, but his feet leave the same blood prints as mine. The Vatican catalogued the letter, then quietly removed it from its archives. It does not exist in official records, but fragments survive. A researcher who defected in the 1970s claimed to have copied portions before disappearing. No one knows what became of him, but his words remain haunting, human, impossible to ignore. And there, in the silence between those 2 letters, one to a shogun who would not reply, and one from a chief who would never be answered, lies the truth of power and faith. The Vatican could reach across oceans, but sometimes it could not bear to look across its own reflection. In another quiet corner of the Apostolic Archive, a single box sits on a shelf labeled in faded ink. Oriente, the East. Those who are granted access to open it rarely speak of what they find. Inside are hand-drawn maps older than nations, maps that show rivers that do not exist, mountain ranges never charted, and coastlines that twist into impossible shapes. Some maps are drawn in Latin, others in Chinese, and some in languages no one can yet read. These maps were made by Jesuit missionaries in the 16th and 17th centuries. Men like Matteo Ricci, the Yi, priest who mastered Mandarin and became the first Westerner invited into the Forbidden City. But Ricci's letters spoke of more than diplomacy. He wrote of ancient scrolls locked in monasteries, stories of floods and divine visitors, myths that mirrored Genesis but predated it. Another priest, Johann Adam Schall, became the imperial astronomer of Beijing, a foreigner trusted to track the heavens for the emperor. In secret, he wrote of a buried library beneath a temple, filled with books that spoke of stars falling to earth and gods walking among men. When his diary reached Rome, it vanished. Not all Jesuits returned. Some were captured, others simply disappeared. One, Father Bento de Goa, went in search of a hidden Christian kingdom beyond the Himalayas. He died before his report arrived, leaving behind only one cryptic line. They speak of light, but not the same light. Back in Rome, unease grew. The Vatican had wanted to spread faith, but what came back were echoes of other faiths, older than its own. The maps of Asia, now sealed in the archive, suggest that the Church found not emptiness, but memory, that the world it sought to convert already held truths too ancient to be rewritten. And so those maps remain, locked in silence, marked by dust and secrecy. They tell of lost cities, temples beneath mountains, and knowledge that refused to kneel. Somewhere in the stone heart of the Vatican, they wait still, patient, untouched, whispering to anyone who dares to listen that not all roads of faith lead to Rome. Some led back to where light first began. They brought back questions the Church was not ready to answer, questions about truth, about history, about whether the Gospels were the first word or simply one among many. And so, the Vatican tightened its grip. Missions were quietly shut down. Archives were sealed. The strange scrolls, the forbidden names, the knowledge that didn't fit within doctrine were reclassified as cultural curiosities and locked away. Yet in the silence of those forgotten chambers, the stories still breathe, patient, eternal, waiting for a faith brave enough to face them again. Far to the south, beyond every border of civilization, another mystery lay buried in white silence. Antarctica, a continent untouched by time, where the wind cuts like a blade and the ice remembers everything. In the early 1950s, a Russian expedition ventured into its frozen heart, officially to study geological formations beneath the South Pole. Unofficially, one helicopter made an unplanned landing near a jagged ridge where black rock pierced through the snow like broken teeth. In the pilot's recovered log, a single chilling line appeared. There is a cross, but no one carved it. Photographs were said to have been taken, but none were ever released. Rumor has it, those images reached a Jesuit advisor stationed in Argentina. Weeks later, witnesses reported seeing Vatican officials boarding a Bichei military transport bound for the southern ice. Their mission was classified, their names never recorded. What they found, according to those who whisper of such things, was not a church of men, but of something older. A structure of black volcanic stone, shaped like a chapel, but carved long before any Christian ever walked the earth. Inside, symbols cover the walls, not crosses, but a haloed figure of a fish surrounded by stars. Reverent, yes, but not human. In a sealed chamber below, bones were discovered, wrapped in silk, long-armed, jawless, alongside a metal disc inscribed in Latin and another language no scholar has ever deciphered. The Vatican never confirmed the mission, but records show several researchers involved were suddenly reassigned, their papers seized by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. One priest, Father Luis Berole, tried to publish what he'd seen. He claimed it was neither divine nor demonic, but something the church had no name for. He died in a fire before his book went to print. And then, as always, silence returned. In 1972, Vatican supply records showed an unexplained shipment: tents, heaters, communion vessels, and a chalice carved from obsidian. No explanation was ever given. Worship or containment? The snow offered no answers, yet those who have visited the southern ice speak of a sound that does not belong to wind, a faint bell ringing somewhere beneath the glacier. The Vatican denies everything, but in the archives, under a folder marked Null ad Memoriam, nothing to be remembered, coordinates remain. Among the Vatican's most whispered names is that of Father Malachi Martin, a man both revered and condemned, called a prophet by some and traitor by others. Born in Ireland in 1921, Martin rose quickly through the Jesuit ranks. He was brilliant, multilingual, and close to the most powerful circles in Rome. For years, he served under Cardinal Bay during the Second Vatican Council, privy to discussions that shaped doctrine, politics, and secrecy itself. But then, abruptly, he left. He requested release from his vows, left the Vatican behind, and settled in New York. There he began to write novels, essays, and chilling accounts of exorcisms and corruption. His most famous work, Hostage to the Devil, described possession in meticulous, terrifying detail. But between the lines, readers found something deeper. Martin hinted that evil did not merely haunt the possessed, it had entered the very halls of the Vatican. In a radio interview in the 1990s, when asked if the devil had ever walked the corridors of the Holy See, Martin paused for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Yes, he has walked the halls." Weeks before his death in 1999, Martin claimed to possess sealed documents from Rome, kept in a box marked only with the letter Q. He fell mysteriously in his apartment and never recovered. The box was never found. A nurse who cared for him recalled his last words, spoken in Latin through trembling lips: "The smoke, it is already inside." His death was ruled accidental. His warnings were dismissed as fiction. Yet for many within the church, his shadow still lingers, a man who saw too much, said too much, and paid the price for truth. Then there was Father Benedetto, a name erased from official records but whispered in Vatican corridors with unease. He was one of the church's last true exorcists, a quiet man known for unwavering faith and terrible calm. His final assignment took him to a convent in southern Italy. The nuns had reported voices in the walls, oil seeping from stone, and unseen hands moving relics in the night. Benedetto entered alone at sundown, carrying only a wooden cross and a black bag. He was never seen again. The church searched for 3 weeks, then quietly closed the case. The convent was sold and sealed. Villagers still crossed themselves when they passed the gates. He opened a door, one old man said, and something walked through. Years later, a retired archivist named Luca confessed in a taped interview that Father Benedetto's mission had been tied to a forbidden scroll, one describing a ritual not to summon demons, but to awaken the voices of the dead. The scroll had been buried in the apostolic archive since the 3rd century. Before his disappearance, Benedetto had requested access to it. In his room, a note was found. "If I do not return, do not follow. The voice speaks my name now, and it knows yours too." Inside the Vatican, a locked file remains, marked with a black sun and a single phrase, "Lost during service. Case unresolved." Those who have read it call it the most disturbing record in church history. And then, there was the betrayal from within. He was known simply as Paolo, the Pope's butler, a quiet, loyal man who served coffee, arranged robes, and walked unseen through the marble corridors of power. For 7 years, he stood at the side of one of the most powerful men on earth. But in 2012, the Vatican discovered he had been leaking confidential documents to journalists, letters, memos, financial records, and reports that revealed corruption, manipulation, and secret struggles within the Holy See. When caught, Paolo said only, "I saw evil, and I could not stay silent." Over 100 documents were recovered from his small apartment, some merely embarrassing, others catastrophic. They spoke of hidden societies, of internal coups, and of power being traded like gold. He was arrested, pardoned, and vanished into obscurity. But his words remain, echoing through every scandal that has followed. "I saw evil." From the Swiss Guards' blood-stained corridors to the letters buried beneath ice, from the maps of forgotten empires to the forbidden rites of the faithful, the Vatican's greatest secrets are not just stories. They are mirrors. And when the world looks into them, it must ask, what it is truly seeing: faith or fear, light or the shadow it casts, because in the city of God, even silence prays. One document stood apart from the rest, a quiet but devastating inventory. It listed clandestine meetings between unnamed clergy and foreign intelligence operatives, a network woven through faith and espionage alike. Another paper referenced a sealed vault within the Vatican Bank, marked by an unfamiliar sigil, one belonging to no known department or order. When investigators asked Paolo if he had shared those records too, he hesitated and said softly, "Some things are not mine to reveal." After his arrest, the Pope's butler became the Vatican's only prisoner, confined to a stone cell built to hold no one. Guards reported he spent his nights in silence, reading scripture by candlelight, sometimes weeping. 18 months later, the Pope pardoned him. Paolo left quietly, slipping from the world like smoke. Some say he returned to civilian life under a new name. Others whisper he was hidden deep within the church, not as punishment, but as protection. The full truth of what he tried to expose remains unknown. The journalist who first published his leaks later admitted, "What I received was only the surface." Paolo had spoken of a second envelope, a final set of documents, but it never surfaced. And so one of the Vatican's most haunting betrayals remains unfinished, not because the truth was never found, but because it was never fully told. Long before Paolo's silence, another man stood against Rome, not with secrets, but with thought. The year was 1600, and in the field of flowers in Rome, a Dominican friar named Giordano Bruno faced his end. His crime was not treason or murder. It was imagination. He had dared to say that the stars were suns like our own, that other worlds might circle them, and that perhaps life, even souls, existed beyond Earth. Today, his vision fills textbooks, but in his time it threatened the very heart of church authority. The Vatican demanded he recant. Bruno refused. His final words before the fire were, "Perhaps you fear, in passing judgment on me, more than I fear receiving it. The flames rose, and with them, a warning that ideas can burn just as fiercely as heretics. 2 centuries later, when the Enlightenment dawned, the Vatican quietly began revisiting the transcripts of its oldest trials. Bruno's name resurfaced, along with others, monks, mystics, nuns, silenced for visions or ideas that didn't fit. One file told the story of Sister Benedetta Carini, a 17th century nun who claimed visions of Christ and confessed her love for another woman in her convent. Declared possessed, she was imprisoned for over 30 years. Her writings vanished until fragments of her journal were rediscovered in 1978. The pattern was undeniable. Many of those condemned for heresy had spoken truths later embraced by the Church itself. But only centuries later, when memory had cooled and guilt could be called progress. Vatican officials have since called those trials errors of their age. But they were not errors. They were choices, calculated silences dressed as righteousness. And deep within the apostolic archive, boxes labeled only with numbers still hold their names, each page a voice extinguished in its own time. How many truths, one must wonder, were buried in flames, only to rise again in the ashes of history? In the spring of 1962, workers repairing drainage beneath St. Peter's Basilica broke through an old wall. Behind it lay a hidden chamber, unmarked on any Vatican plan. At its center was a coffinless body, the robed skeleton of a high-ranking cleric. His garments were ancient, but unnervingly well-preserved. His ring was silver, its seal worn beyond recognition. There was no record of his burial, no mention in Vatican logs. Officials sealed the chamber within hours, but whispers spread among the archivists. One rumor claimed the body was not centuries old, but recent, less than 20 years dead. The skin, said one scientist, was too intact, the bones too fresh. He was reassigned before he could publish his report. Tucked inside the corpse's robes was a folded parchment, faded yet legible. It contained strange Latin phrases, not prayers, but invocations, and a wax seal bearing not the papal crest, but that of the Jesuit Superior General. Why would the head of the Jesuits mark a secret corpse beneath the Vatican's altar? When pressed years later, a cardinal smiled faintly and said, "There are things beneath St. Peter's that belong to time, not to man." The Vatican never confirmed the find. The body remains without name, without cause, without peace, a relic of mystery entombed beneath the holiest ground on earth. Deeper still lies a chamber few have ever seen. It does not appear on maps, nor in the Vatican's blueprints. Those who guard it call it the hidden altar. Beneath the apostolic palace, sealed by an ancient lock and a ritual older than the church itself, it is entered only by the Pope, and only once, on the first night of his papacy. No one else is permitted inside. The altar is carved from black marble streaked with veins of gold that shimmer without flame. Symbols older than Christianity cover its surface, spirals, eyes, and unknown sigils. It is said that when a pope touches it, he sees not the world as it is, but as it truly was. Some see the past unmasked, others the future still waiting. One pope, Leo XIII, refused to enter. "Non sum dignus," he whispered. "I am not worthy." Within 3 days, he was dead. None have refused since. In 1972, a South American diplomat accidentally wandered too far through the underground corridors and glimpsed what he was never meant to see. A dark room pulsing with light. A marble altar hovering above the ground as though untouched by gravity. The Vatican dismissed his account. He was recalled and his report vanished. Yet in the margins of a classified file, one cryptic note remains. The altar is not a place of prayer. It is a witness. What it witnesses, no one outside the papacy has ever known. No pope has spoken of it, not in letters, not in confession, not even on his deathbed. Still, the silence of stone keeps its shape. In the marble corridors above, another secret hides in plain sight, beneath the very feet of millions. A language written not in ink, but in design. For decades, Sister Elisabetta, an elderly nun tasked with cleaning the floors, walked the same corridors until one winter evening, she noticed something impossible. As sunlight passed through a window grill, a perfect eye appeared on the floor, a pattern that existed only for a few minutes each day. She began to look closer. Across the Vatican, she found circles within triangles, crosses without Christ, and serpentine lines woven through mosaic tiles. She drew them, studied them, mapped them. Her notes suggested the Vatican's architecture formed a hidden code, a network of symbols leading towards something central, buried beneath the basilica's dome. When she shared her drawings with a Jesuit scholar, he turned pale. He showed her an old architectural manuscript marked Pro Sancta Structura, bearing the same patterns, written for the master builders of the Vatican, its author's name violently scratched out. Within a year, Sister Elisabetta was reassigned. Her notebook vanished. Some believe the symbols form a map, not of space, but of purpose, tracing a story the Church has long tried to forget, because not all secrets are buried. Some are built into the walls themselves. And above it all, beneath the great dome of St. Peter's, another mystery hums in silence. Stand beneath it and speak. Your voice will not echo. Architects call it geometry. Scholars call it design. But one man, a French acoustician named Claude Bourdon, called it something else. He said the dome was built to listen. Invited by the Vatican in the early 1900s to study its acoustics, Bourdon left Rome terrified. His journals, found after his death, contain one haunting phrase: they built it to listen. He never explained who they were. Some say he uncovered a truth that cost him his peace. Others think he simply went mad. Yet those who have stood beneath that dome agree. The silence there feels alive. Perhaps it listens still. At the heart of the Vatican, rising above all secrets, stands an ancient witness, the Egyptian obelisk in St. Peter's Square. Carved in Heliopolis over 2,000 years ago, it was raised not for popes, but for pharaohs. Today, it pierces the Roman sky, crowned by a cross, pagan stone carrying Christian steel. But beneath its base, some say, the original inscription remains, half erased, yet still legible. Lux in aeternum, eternal light. A promise or a warning. In the city where faith meets silence, even the stones, remember what men try to forget. Pharaohs once stood before it. Priests once read the heavens by its shadow. Yet here, in the heart of St. Peter's Square, that same ancient obelisk still moves with the sun, its dark line crossing the stones of Rome like a silent clock of secrets. In 1586, Pope Sixtus V ordered the monument raised again, a feat that nearly cost men their lives. But what mattered most to him was not its height, it was its placement. Records say he consulted secret star charts and the counsel of a monk who claimed to have deciphered patterns hidden within the book of Genesis. The monk vanished soon after. Twice each year, the obelisk's shadow slices perfectly across the square, aligning with the entrance of the Apostolic Palace. And on those days, the shadow touches a single nameless stone. Smooth, unmarked, omitted from every plan. Tour guides are told never to mention it. Some whisper that it seals a crypt older than Constantine's Rome. Others claim it marks a celestial mechanism, a prophecy that when the stars align just so, the ground beneath St. Peter's will open to a door not meant for the living. In the 1970s, a Jesuit astronomer used satellite imaging to chart the shadow's course. His final report spoke of precision beyond human design. 2 weeks later, he resigned and vanished from public record. The Vatican calls the obelisk a symbol of continuity. But those who stand beneath it at dawn or dusk swear its shadow still whispers, and that someone, somewhere, listens. There are 4 grand doors leading into St. Peter's Basilica, carved with saints and martyrs, open to millions each year. But deep within the Vatican's walls lies a 5th, unmarked, unopened, unknown. They call it Janua Quinta, the 5th door, hidden behind the chapel of the choir, sealed into a false wall near the treasury vaults. No handle, no hinge, only seamless stone. In 1938, a young Swiss guard named Paolo Bonacci discovered it during a night patrol. His diary, later found among his belongings, ended with one line: "It felt warm." By morning, he was gone. His armor lay neatly folded at his post. The Vatican called it desertion. His family called it impossible. During restoration in 1984, workers reported hearing low music from behind that same wall. Not echoing, but humming, as if sung from beneath the earth. When they spoke of it, they were dismissed. Hidden in the secret archives is a folder titled Janua Quinta. Inside are sketches of the door ringed with forgotten symbols and trembling notes about a gate between time, and the echo of prayers never spoken aloud. What stands behind it, no one knows. Some say it leads to a crypt older than the basilica. Others call it a metaphor, the church itself, once sealed away. Whatever it is, the door remains untouched, an invitation waiting for the wrong hand. The Pope's face is known to all, the shepherd of faith, the voice of God's city. Yet behind him moves a quieter power, the Shadow Council. Unlike the College of Cardinals, this council wears no robes, keeps no minutes, leaves no trace. Their meetings unfold behind locked doors in forgotten chambers of the Apostolic Palace, rooms that predate the Renaissance itself. Their task is not to shape doctrine, but to manage danger, to steer the church through storms no one must see. Some whisper they can veto papal decrees. Others claim they awaken only when the Vatican itself is at risk, not from enemies, but from within. In 1978, a retired bishop described a circle of 12, whose signatures appeared on orders the Pope never signed. Among them, a single layman, a financier with ties to international banks, a man who had never taken vows. He vanished in 1982, weeks before a Vatican banker was found hanging beneath London's Blackfriars Bridge. The Vatican said suicide. The press said cover-up. Years later, leaked memos spoke of a midnight meeting of the 12. Not 13. The Pope was not present. If not him, then who? In 1990, Bishop Carlo Montesi returned to Rome from Argentina with more than sermons in his suitcase. He had been tracing secret Vatican accounts, masked as missions across 3 continents. He stepped off a train and was never seen again. 10 years later, his unfinished letter surfaced in a storage room. Its last line read, "They know I found it." A Florentine journalist, Elisa Moretti, reopened his trail in 2003. She uncovered receipts, coded ledgers, and a map of financial sanctuaries. Montesi had spoken of dark generosity, a phrase that frightened even his closest allies. Before she could publish, her apartment was ransacked. Nothing stolen except her notes and Montesi's letter. She fled Italy. She has not been heard from since. Years later, a file labeled Montesi, restricted, surfaced in the Vatican library. It was empty. Because some secrets don't end, they simply disappear with the one who carries them. In 1957, a monk arrived at the Vatican with no past. He called himself Brother Avellino. No parish, no birth record, no ordination papers. He spoke little and worked in silence among the archives. The others called him the Ghost. Decades passed. He never seemed to age. In 1971, a young Jesuit named Paolo was assigned to assist him. Curious, he followed Avellino one night and saw him slip into a locked wing forbidden to all but cardinals. Hours later, the monk emerged empty-handed, murmuring prayers. The next morning, Paolo reported it, but was told no such person existed. Avellino's room was empty. His handwriting had vanished from every copied text. On Paolo's desk lay a sealed envelope. Inside, one line written in red ink. Truth is a weight not every soul can carry. Later whispers claimed Avellino belonged to an order that vanished during the Inquisition. Monks who vowed invisibility, guardians who served the church by being forgotten. And still, in the quiet of the archives, some say you can hear the soft rustle of unseen hands turning parchment pages. Down a corridor that leads nowhere stands another relic, the waiting door. It's iron-framed and cold, even in summer, carved with figures so ancient their faces are worn away. In 1929, a Vatican librarian named Matteo began studying it. He wrote nightly in his journal, "The door is unchanged, yet I feel watched." Weeks later, he heard whispers, not Latin, not Italian, something older, as if the stones themselves were remembering. He brought a colleague to witness it. They waited in silence until a low vibration trembled through the floor. The door shifted, not opening, just leaning. His companion ran. Matteo stayed. By morning, he was gone. His journal lay on a bench. The last line, "It knows I see it. It's waiting for me to open." The hallway was sealed for restoration. Years later, the same colleague confessed on her deathbed. It was not just a door. It was an invitation. And still it stands, untouched, unmarked, colder than stone. Some doors do not open out, they open in. Beneath all of this, deeper than the archives, lies a chamber with no name. Not of marble or gold, but of silence so heavy it presses against the soul. Here, the Vatican keeps what must never be studied. Not relics, but truths too dangerous to survive light. In 1938, a Jesuit scholar named Father Antonio Vieri was granted access to a sealed crate unearthed near the Sea of Galilee. The seal matched one used by the Vatican in the 8th century. Inside, wrapped in linen, was a scroll written in ancient Aramaic, perfectly preserved. It told of a wanderer, neither prophet nor king, who had lived before the flood. His name was smeared beyond recognition. It claimed he walked across eras, appearing in Babylon, in Alexandria, in Rome, long before they were built, leaving one word carved wherever he went: witness. Vieri studied the scroll for 7 years. The more he read, the more fearful he became. His notes hinted at something terrifying. The time was not a line, but a circle, and that this man had walked it again and again. In 1945, Father Vieri vanished. His belongings were sealed and placed in the secret chamber. Decades later, an archivist found a note in his handwriting, tucked inside a book. What if the second coming is not in the future, but the past? The Vatican has never acknowledged the scroll. Some say they made a replica, not for study, but for recognition. Because if the man ever returns, the church must decide whether to welcome him or silence him. And so the story closes, not with certainty, but with silence. Beneath the marble and the prayers, the Vatican still breathes secrets, some buried in stone, others walking quietly beside the living. Perhaps truth is not hidden to protect power, but to protect those who are not ready to see, because in the city of God, even silence prays.